Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce today Fulvio Ferlito. Fulvio got his master degree in astrophysics and cosmology here a few years ago under my supervision, and then he went to Munich to MPA for a PhD that he just finished this summer. He has been working on analyzing at large simulations of the MillenniumTNG series. And today he will tell us about his PhD work about fully nonlinear simulations of galaxy intrinsic alignments for weak lengths. Please.
All right. Thanks, Marco, for inviting and for the nice introduction. It's very nice to give this talk today because, yeah, I've studied here, so I'm quite attached to this place, this university, and it's very nice to come back and give this talk after these 4 years. So let's get started. So I did my PhD supervised by Volker Springel, but I had many collaborators that are shown here. And it took place within the context of the MillenniumTNG collaboration, of which I am a core member. So I will start by just giving you an overview of what it is. And oh, perfect. Sorry, I don't know which key okay, perfect. And yeah, and then I will in particular focus on weak lensing and my weak lensing studies in the context of the MillenniumTNG simulations. So first of all, the MillenniumTNG project comes together, brings together two very popular numerical astrophysics projects, which are the IllustrisTNG, which was a very successful galaxy formation simulation project, together with a cosmological box size of the Millennium project. So the idea is to bring together numerical galaxy formation in the context of cosmology to perform simulations that are both big enough and also with enough resolution. And in particular, this project consists in a series of runs which are some dark matter only, which are fixed and paired initial conditions. Then there are some, there is the hydrodynamic flagship run with a box size of 500 megaparsec over H, and also some massive runs with massive neutrinos, which reach a very big box size. I basically used all of them. So let's just have a glance over the main hydro run. It is 15 times larger in volume than the IllustrisTNG, but it basically features almost identical galaxy formation model with pooling, ISM modeling, supernova, and galactic winds, and feedback from AGN. Yeah, so apart from this very nice picture, which depicts a light cone in different phases, let's say, a snapshot, there is a variety of data products with this project comes with. In particular, there are some very high resolution light cones, which feature a certain angular patch of the sky and contain the information about all the particles. These data products can become very, very memory consuming, as you can imagine. And this problem of memory usage and limited memory availability can be overcome by storing the information about certain particles in a certain angular region of the sky within a certain pixel, let's say, in the sky. So we lose the information about the single particle, but we preserve the information on the angular scale, let's say. This is the so-called mass shell outputs, which I also used quite abundantly during my PhD. And these are ideal for weak lensing applications, as we will see in a second. So there have been like many core papers about MillenniumTNG. We studied several domains of astrophysics, and now I will tell you just a bit about weak lensing. So I will try to give a broad enough introduction about it. So basically, we observe distant objects, the universe, for example, galaxies, and to some extent, basically every object that is sending light to us, this light gets distorted, feels the gravitational field of the intervening large-scale structure, and we refer to strong lensing, where the distortion of such images is severe. Like this image can maybe a single image can result in multiple images, or strong, or like arcs or Einstein rings. But indeed, in practice, most of the galaxies are not affected to strong lensing, but to some extent, every galaxy is affected to weak lensing, which can usually be parameterized in terms of convergence and shear, where convergence will modify our galaxy image by shrinking and enlarging it eventually, while the shear is an imaginary quantity that whose first component can result in an elliptification along horizontal or vertical line, while the other component is a diagonal. So with these three numbers, basically, we can create a linear mapping of a distortion of an image. And usually in weak lensing, we can interchangeably, to some extent, use convergence and shear interchangeably. Yeah. So weak lensing in these years, in these decades, has established as one standard cosmological probe. And in particular, here we can see equation for the convergence, and we see that cosmological parameters come into place. Indeed, it's nowadays important piece of information to put constraints on cosmological parameter, in particular the S8 parameter. With the next survey, next generation of surveys coming, which is the so-called stage 4 surveys like Euclid or LSST, we need to provide, in order to extract the most out of this data, we need to provide very high fidelity numerical prediction for these observables. This is because we are starting to enter, no, we already started entering the highly nonlinear regime, where dark matter only cosmological simulation is not good enough to predict how it will look like. We need to properly model physical and numerical systematics, in particular physics like the effect of baryons, baryonic physics versus dark matter only, for example, or also the intrinsic alignment about which I will talk later. So basically, during my PhD project, I focused on some of the most important systematics in weak lensing, and this resulted in mainly 3 publications where I studied the angular resolution, variance suppression, and Born approximation, which are numerical aspects. But today, I would like to focus on the impact of baryonic physics, neutrinos, and intrinsic alignment of galaxies. But of course, if you do have questions on other things, feel free to ask me, because I have a lot of backup slides we can discuss later in the question session. So yeah, I focus mainly on popular weak lensing observables, the gold standard are correlation function of the convergence and its power spectrum, shear correlation function and convergence power spectrum. But nowadays also higher order statistics are becoming more and more popular, and especially in this context, numerical simulation are really the golden standard to provide prediction, because it's really difficult to theoretically model these higher order statistics. So let's start by talking about the impact of baryons and massive neutrinos. So the idea here is we use our weak lensing ray tracing code on these mass shells, and basically we take dark matter only run. We take the same initial conditions, but also with all the baryonic physics model I introduced earlier, and we compare them one-to-one. At the first comparison, for example, we can see here the convergence field in the dark matter only case. I don't also plot the one with baryons, because by eye they will look very, very similar. So I plot the difference, their difference instead, and we can start to see some, let's say, dipole pattern. So blue and red coupled together, many scales. So this basically means that the same structure ends up being in a slightly different position, whether it is dark matter only or simulation with baryons. And yeah.
So what video here are we looking at? So
this is, if I remember correctly, this is 10 by 10 degrees. Yeah. But getting more, bit more quantitative, we can compute the power spectrum. Also, let me say that we are working with full sky maps. Here, I'm focusing only on a square patch for visual inspection purposes. This is the ratio of the power spectrum in the in the hydro versus the dark matter only case. And we see that basically this is the power spectrum, the angular power spectrum, right? We are having the L angular number, right? So we see that the effects become larger and larger as we move towards smaller angular scales, right? And yeah, now like the upcoming surveys will be starting to really go in this regime. So we need to properly model what happens there. And we see, for example, a suppression followed by upturn, and a different redshift scales, different source redshift. So basically the source plane at which I am observing the galaxies that get lensed, weakly lensed. This corresponds to the same spoon-like feature, but moved towards smaller L's. This is just a basically geometrical effect, because the same physical size will correspond to a smaller angular scale if I put the same object farther away. But qualitatively, it is a very similar effect. It just gets moved to smaller angular scales. This suppression here can be connected to AGN feedback mainly. So basically, in galaxy formation context, there is this feedback that pushes the matter in the outskirts of the galaxies, for example, and our objects end up having a distribution of density that is more smoothed. And on the other end, there is effects like radiative cooling that can help. On the other end, the structures that are collapse faster, and then can result in enhancing this part. And these are, we don't have to focus on all of them, but this is just to give you an idea. This is the ratio of the angular power spectrum, but we also focus on other observables. And for example, if we look at the PDF, we see that it gets narrowed. And there is a suppression, again, here in this domain, here, this area, and then an upturn, again, eventually connected to radiative cooling. So this is definitely a non-trivial impact that has to be accounted for when predicting weak lensing. And moving on another physical systematics, the total mass of neutrinos, we considered 3 cases: the one with massless neutrinos, and then we considered other 2 cases with massive neutrinos, increasing the total mass of neutrinos, and we see that as the neutrino mass increases, we are suppressing the power. And here we see that the feature is quite different with respect to baryons, and in particular, it is almost scale independent. And also looking at the other statistics, it is also definitely significant. And what happens is that neutrinos are thought to be relativistic species, at least for most of their the life of the universe. So with their free streaming, they smooth out the density field. This, for example, corresponds in a narrowing of the PDF of the convergence field. And also they kind of suppress the lower tails of the minima significantly. This basically, we can imagine like they feel like that they end up filling the emptiest voids. Yeah, it's very significant also for these systematics. And I put everything together and compared also to other projects, because it's very important to also compare different numerical projects, also to convince the observational community that what we are doing is reliable enough, or to which extent it is reliable, at which scales it starts to break down. So if we look at these curves here, these are all baryonic physics from different projects, And we see that there is a very good agreement, at least until intermediate scales, let's say. And then things start to go in different ways. This is probably because we have different models, different ways of implementing the same physical processes. And we also, it is interesting to put this into context with massive neutrinos, because eventually, depending on their mass, their effect on weak lensing observables can become even stronger than the one of the baryons. All right, so this was an overview on the impact of baryons and massive neutrinos. Now we can move on to another very important and eventually problematic, arguably even more problematic systematics, that is the intrinsic alignment. So before I was talking to you about the image of a lot of galaxies end up being lensed. And since this lensing is very weak, we need millions of them basically to start extracting the cosmological signal. And the underlying assumption when we do this is that these galaxies are randomly, these source background galaxies are randomly oriented. How reliable is this assumption? Well, it turns out that it's not super reliable, and it's quite difficult also to model to which extent they are already showing an intrinsic alignment in this sense, right? So weak lensing is usually also also sometimes called extrinsic alignment, because if we put a foreground mass over density, we see that objects pass from having like the random alignment and ends up being shown as tangentially aligned with respect to a foreground over density. But if we put a tractor, so a very massive object, for example, this is in the foreground, so it's in the lens plane, for example. But if we put something in the source plane, so say a very massive cluster or something like that, we see that what happens is that galaxies are not really randomly aligned, but they kind of tend to have their, say, major axis, if they are ellipses, that is aligned, pointing towards the most massive objects, say. So basically from this to this. And you can see these two effects are going against each other. Indeed, there is an anti-correlation that we can measure, and we'll see this very soon. So I hope I gave you a overview of what intrinsic alignments are, what we refer to as intrinsic alignments. So there was a paper already with the MillenniumTNG, within the MillenniumTNG collaboration, that focused only on intrinsic alignment, so not considering weak lensing, taking snapshots of the simulation. And for certain snapshots, for example, the one at redshift 0, focused on all the galaxies, say, and then was computing the correlation function. This is the projected 2D correlation function, and to see to which extent these galaxies are aligned. And this was also, this signal is not only quite significant, as you can see, but it's also in quite good agreement with observational data. Observational data that is, for us, are like easier to get a redshift 0, because if you go to higher redshift, then there is also the lensing. So this is the redshift at which we can compare. But with this good result, with this good agreement, we want to go further, and we want to now use this information about the intrinsic alignment to produce a complete forward model of how weak lensing will appear when there is intrinsic alignment, when there is no intrinsic alignment. And so basically what we did is we took not the snapshot, but entire light cone. Actually, this is just a portion. It is much larger. It's 500 terabytes of data, which was lots of fun to process and to work with. Took a lot of time. And basically, we ran a sub-halo finder, like halo and like FOF and subfine on these 500 terabytes of data. We identified objects in this very large light cone covering 1 octant of the sky. And we created a mock galaxy catalog for which we saved most important quantities. In particular, we were interested in the shape tensor, which basically we compute by taking all the star particles that make up a galaxy, and then we compute it in that way, the 3D tensor. But then we want to project it on the celestial sphere so that we convert this information into an intrinsic shear, so basically a gamma, right? And this is how we manage to assign to each object a certain intrinsic shear, but we can also compute the extrinsic shear of the weak lensing through our ray tracing code within the same large-scale structure. So everything is very self-consistent. And now we have the intrinsic and extrinsic shear, and we can compute their correlation function. So sorry, this plot is a bit, there is a lot going on. Basically, we took 3 redshift slices. So we investigated this into these 3 redshift bins. Yeah, this is a popular choice in the weak lensing surveys. Yeah, and basically in green, we see the weak lensing signal that is dominant. But then we have in red the intrinsic autocorrelation. And then we have the negative, so with a flipped sign, because I convinced you earlier that these 2 quantities are anti-correlated, of the cross correlation, gravitational and intrinsic. And we can see that these quantities are non-negligible, are approximately, like, say, 10%, for example, in the lowest redshift bin, but also they change a lot with redshift. And yeah, now that we looked at the single component, gravitational shear, intrinsic shear, okay, perfect. Now the next step is we have computed one, we have computed the other, then now we bring them together. So we basically add the 2 components in the regime where these 2 shears are not super strong, let's say. The images are like reasonably still circular enough. We can directly sum them, and we obtain the total shear of an object. So now what we do is we have the total shear. So basically we have produced a forward model to see how objects really look in the sky with their ellipticity. What we can do is we can do the same comparison between this and a catalog where we kept fixed the intrinsic shear, the extrinsic shear, so the weak lensing was the same, but the intrinsic shear, we basically tilted every galaxy by a random angle. So we really have a intrinsically randomized intrinsic shear, right? And this is exactly what was our next step, where we managed to create convergence maps, which are comprehensive of all the signal. Then there is only the clean weak lensing signal. GSN here is addressed as is the short for galaxy shape noise, which is the fact that when we are considering galaxies that even in the case in which they are completely randomly oriented, they will still introduce a white noise component in our convergence field, so that we cannot remove, but it's quite easy to model. And then there is the case where there is also the intrinsic alignment component. And this is the impact at the level of our spectrum. Basically, let's just focus on the purple, which is the case with intrinsic alignment, versus the green, where there is no intrinsic alignment. We see that this is not only strong, not only the order of 10% or more, but it's also it has a strong qualitative dependence on redshift. And this can be explained. It's a bit more complex, but we managed to kind of to understand why we have, for example, a suppression here. We have only an enhancement on the highest redshift bin. And what we did also is to take single bins and then to compute the cross-bin correlation. And we see that the effects are even stronger. So this is really important to account for. And we also looked at other higher order statistics. I will only show the PDF here for brevity. But basically, we see that the distortions are really non-trivial and like quite difficult to model, especially if we go for higher order statistics. And yeah, so this finally, last thing we looked at or at least in this presentation, we applied a mass cut, and we saw that the most massive objects are the ones that tend to have, so this is again the shear correlation function, sorry. This is the intrinsic component in the violet and blue with respect to the gravitational component. And we see that the higher is the stellar mass cut that we apply, the stronger is the alignment, okay? And yeah, this was it. I leave you with the website of our project, which is being released right now. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you have ideas for how to use MillenniumTNG. My ray tracing code, which is completely public. So if you have ideas for expanding it or you want to use it, whatever, you find bugs, you let me know. Yeah, many thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you. Very, very nice. So in one curiosity and one question. So in the run with the massive neutrinos, do you have also baryons or not?
We don't have baryons.
Okay, so that's the question. So the effect of massive neutrinos is scale independent. So you choose almost scale independent. And have you tried, for example, to understand if there is one parameter, standard parameter like sigma-8 that can mimic the effect of massive neutrinos, like using a rescaling method by Angulo and White in this case, also to understand if you're going in the direction of sigma-8 effect or massive neutrinos effect in the light.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and indeed that's a very good suggestion. So we haven't. So I strongly, I mean, I'm quite sure that it's degenerate. There is some certain degree of degeneracy with the omega m parameter, for example. Sorry, sigma-8. Yeah, the sigma-8 parameter, yeah, of course we cannot rerun the same simulation again to see how it goes, but using some rescaling would indeed help to disentangle the two and see if there is some, like, to which extent there is a difference between the two. Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Giovanni?
Thanks, Fulvio. On the same line, so when you are comparing the two simulations with different neutrino masses, what are you fixing? Omega matter or omega cold? So omega CDM plus omega baryons?
I would have to look at the paper for this.
Okay. Because I was thinking if you're fixing omega matter, then the difference is maybe just because you have like, all dark matter plus baryon is different. So it's an overall shift.
Yeah. I honestly I would have to look at the paper at the exact cosmology. Yeah.
Leonardo?
I didn't understand something from the last thing you showed.
Yeah.
So the cut in mass. On what do you mean? On what mass are you cutting? Like
Yeah. Good question. Sorry, I was running toward the end and I was not super clear in this part. So as I was mentioning earlier, we have this very memory consistent light cone, and we run a sub-halo finder. So we identify sub-halos, and then we take the star particles belonging to the sub-halos as our galaxies. So we sum the stellar mass, so which is the mass of the stellar particles. And in our catalog, we will have a certain distribution of mass, which I can also actually show you. Sorry, there will be some slides. Sorry, here. Okay, perfect. Basically, this is the redshift slices, but here we have the mass function of our galaxies. The vertical dashed lines are the different mass cuts we apply, visualized there. Okay.
So again, the conclusion that you get from the mass cuts is that with the higher mass cut, the effect is stronger.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So just on the line of this thing, so Europe, it is possible to define, let me say, a sort of floating sample for this kind of differential analysis, exclude from the catalog of the object with high mass. because they are most affected by this problem, systematic. So just to reduce the systematics, we can remove from the center the object, the larger mass, just
Yeah, that is a very very good point. And I feel so basically instead of applying a lower mass cut, just going and throwing like the most massive object until
reducing the
yeah. Say we want to, for example, get we want to minimize the impact of intrinsic alignment. Say like we want it below 2%. So we start removing the most massive objects until we reach that level and just pronounce on an order of magnitude or like a number. That's yeah, we haven't done it yet, but that's very nice
practice. That is done with color cuts rather than mass cuts, blue and red. So
yeah,
blue.
Yeah. Yeah, here we put everything together because it was already like enough stuff going on in a paper. So this is actually one of our like probably the immediate follow-up paper will be to disentangle between, because we also saved luminosities in different bands. So in principle, we have a way to distinguish, like the other paper of my collaborator that distinguished between galaxy types and found that the intrinsic alignment is way stronger for elliptical galaxies, yeah, that are more mass also usually. Yeah.
So do you think that the baryonic effect, if it's equal enough to fit it and provide so corrections for likelihood model, and then so to correct say likelihood prediction based just on dark matter, or you think that the effect is
well
maybe we need just emulate or something like that?
I think
that sometimes the effect is seems
yeah,
not too complicated.
yeah. I think it mainly depends on the angular scales we want to stop, because at some point it will become incorrect. At some point it will become just like not reliable anymore. Like if we go to angular scales that are small enough.
Not reliable what the simulation. So
and then if you use everything basically predicting that what happens there becomes very difficult on like on all sides. If you use an emulator, it will not okay. Let's say that the simulation is still reliable, maybe, but then the emulator will disagree with the simulation of the set. There will be a resolution window where maybe the simulation is still giving you a decent prediction, hopefully. Also, we saw that different simulations start to disagree at a certain scale. So that's also like the transition regime where, yeah. But also this depends on the redshift, source redshift at which you're interested, right? That is also something to so it basically is angular scale and also source redshift. And yeah, but still, if I have to share my opinion, which that's very personal, but I think the intrinsic alignment is much more problematic, or like it's more problem, not much more, but in my opinion, more problematic. Also because, sorry, you need to measure it. You need really both things: a galaxy formation simulation and a very big simulation, because it's a cosmological effect where these structures align with the large scale structure. So you need like a big enough large scale structure, but you need galaxies which form naturally. You just can't put them and then decide how to align, because that's what you want to get, not what you want to infuse, say, right? Yeah.
It was a plot, I guess it was the power spectrum of convergence in which the effect of baryons was first a dip, but then there was an upturn to the extreme right. What is that like?
So this is for the impact of baryons?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, the suppression in power is probably due to the smoothing.
Yeah, that I get.
Yeah, and then the upturn is because of cooling, radiative cooling. Structures can say collapse faster.
Maybe you like star formation and stuff. You are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like if you have only adiabatic hydrodynamics, versus if you have like a gas that starts to become very dense, and then you say, oh, stars are forming here, and then you try to model it, and this is also something that is very debated in the
most case was going above the dark matter only, or was still?
Yeah, it was going above. Yeah, again, yeah.
I see no question from the remote audience.
There is another question.
If you don't have, can you do some prediction, for example, for the 10 populated pressure bins of sources for Euclid? So the impact of baryons and intrinsic alignment, have you done this? Because you've shown all the results at a fixed spreadsheet. Have you tried to populate Litecoin with a
No,
N
this is
of Z, which meaning, for example, Euclid, and do the
Yeah.
10 equipopulated pressure bins and understanding which are the most important bins for the intrinsic alignment and baryons impact? Have you tried?
This is an excellent idea for a follow-up. We say it also in the paper, like, because this is our galaxy redshift distribution, which is not that doesn't resemble the observational one. So we would have to somehow, in a smartest possible way, like remove objects to simulate the fact that, for example, at very high redshift, you start seeing very few objects, and these are also the ones that are most aligned. So from this point of view, we may be a bit overestimating, but it's not so much more that we are overestimating it. It's still definitely significant. Yeah, especially for the cross correlation that I showed earlier, there is like 20–30% suppression that will not go away at all. Yeah. But yeah.
Maybe the top place.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, I don't see any further questions. So Fulvio will be around for a few days. So for sure tomorrow and on Thursday. So if you are interested talking to him, he will be somewhere.
Yeah.
Possibly at second floor, but not tomorrow morning. I will put it in my office because the room was already booked. But anyway, you will find him around. So or maybe drop him an email and I will put you in touch. And yeah, let's thank Fulvio.